Hi there, everybody. Sorry, folks. There was this little button that said "Go Live," and I missed that. Can you hear me now? How about how about it? Are we live? Give me a 5x5 if we're live. So,
Yep, you're live.
yeah, cool.
Mhm.
All right. Welcome, everybody. This is gonna be a fun little get together. Got a couple of good friends with me today. 13th Monkey, who some of you have already met if you saw the first Starfort video that we did a few weeks back.
Hello, hello.
Hello, hello. that's that's Mike, fellow Mike, part of the Mike-tinuum. And then with us today is another good friend named Ben, and he's also known as Analog. He's got a Twitter account called Waking Up with Analog, and he shares all kinds of really interesting tidbits from our past when it comes to newspaper articles and things that he's found in archives. And he's a tremendous wealth of knowledge when it comes to history and all kinds of different subjects. So it's fun to have him along. We've been talking on and off over the last few years in Discord and Mike as well. And so this is our first time on together. Welcome, Ben.
Thanks for having me.
And welcome, Mike. And
Thanks for having me again.
yeah, it's a pleasure. So I called this Starforts I Have Known and Loved because one of the things that I noticed with a lot of the research that's being done into the subject is that people are they tend to be viewing things from above, looking at pictures online, but there's not a whole lot of personal stories or boots on the ground footage for a lot of this stuff. So I realized after I got turned on to the topic of Starforts that I'd actually been in many of them and actually lived in about 6 or 7 of them, still live in one, have another one a stone's throw away, and several others that I had explored without even realizing it. And then also I lived in Italy for a few years, and while I was in Italy, I lived in Rome, which is a massive star citadel, and we'll cover that one in a later video. Probably need 2 parts because there's so much to talk about when it comes to Rome. But I lived in Siena as well. I lived in Padova, which was a city right near Venice. And because of the proximity to Venice, while I was there for the school year that I was there for, I went probably 30 times to Venice. So even though I didn't live in Venice, I got to know it very well and fairly intimately. So they're just incredible places, and I always just thought of them as medieval forts, and and that's just how they did things. But it wasn't until a few years back, starting to hang out with Ben and Mike and some other people who were independently researching these subjects like Tartary and star forts and mud floods and resets and all of these different threads that are kind of going throughout the alternative research community, that I started to realize how vast the realm is, that there's a whole lot of stuff that's in places that it shouldn't be if you know the mainstream historical narratives and when things were supposedly built and how long it took to build them, and so that's something that there's a lot of heated debate about right now, because a lot of people came to conclusions and then made claims and they didn't have evidence for their claims. Things weren't substantiated, and so there's a lot of finger pointing and people calling other people out for doing, poor research and misrepresenting the truth in different ways. So some suspect that might be intentional, and others just that it's kind of the way things go, and people who are just trying to understand more about what's going on here take to the computer and start doing research on their own, or boots on the ground research as well. So anyway, with that introduction, we can just say what Mike is showing here is the old town of Denia, which was a star fort, and the main fort is still there, and the streets of the cities, you can kind of see this old world form to the cities and the buildings. but it's not what I would call, what a lot of people like to call Tartarian architecture. Maybe you guys would like to just chime in about just the subject of Tartary as a whole, because that's kind of a hotly contested subject right now, with people like Ewar and Wooden Nichols suggesting that it's a psyop that's been given to us by the Chinese as a way of overthrowing the West through a subversion of the historical narratives. So what do you guys think of that subject?
The one quick answer I have to that is Mercator was Dutch.
So for people who don't know who Mercator was, you got take it a step back.
Mercator was a map maker, one of many map makers.
And so why is that important? You got to fill in the blanks a little bit for the people who don't know what you're talking about.
Mapping was considered a high art back in the day. The sound quality seems really weird.
I hear you perfect. Is there echo?
Yeah, you sound great to me.
Yeah? Okay, good.
Yeah.
So mapping was considered a high art. And there are so many map drawers that put Tartary as a distinct location, which is now Siberia, as being Tartary.
Right.
So you can say it's a Chinese or Russian psyop, and all of these map makers came from Western Europe. So if it is a scam by anybody, it's a scam by Western Europe, because all of these map makers came from there, and they put Tartary prominently in their maps. And then there's so many more like historical facts that Ben is a lot better in.
I don't think
than I am.
There's not a lot of dispute about whether Tartary existed. The question is what it was, and I think a lot of people early on, they got onto some of these maps, these old maps, show Tartary as being a massive area that covers all of Europe and Siberia, and the amount of area covered by those maps is greater than that of the Roman Empire in some cases. So that I never studied history. I had history courses in university, so I had kind of the basic broad strokes of the historical timeline. But I other than maybe a couple of lines of text, I had never heard of Tartary other than, the bands of, roving Mongols that were taking over that part of the world. And I think you had, the Hittites in not far from there, and there these different civilizations that all existed in that area. But to see these maps where it's looking bigger than the Roman Empire, that really caught me off guard initially, and I'm like, wait a minute, there's way more to this than meets the eye. And that was right around the same time I discovered the Discord and started learning about star forts and finding out how vast they were and how far-reaching. So all of a sudden, a whole lot of threads came together that made me start to question history, and especially when you get into Scaligean chronology and you find out what a crook that guy probably was, that is the foundation for our history, and then tie that into other ideas with Fomenko and his ideas about timelines and interjected time. So I don't know, what would you like to add to that, Ben?
Yeah, well, ultimately, when you dig into any of these histories, you'll find that they're all wrong or a lie of some kind. And ultimately, what it looks like is Arabic, as we know today, along with all languages, have been completely messed with. And Tartary and Barbary, America was left off most maps, or was, drawn inaccurately, purposefully. And you can kind of follow this through Assyrian, Babylon, Phoenician narratives. But Phoenicia, or the Phoenicians, weren't a distinct race. That's kind of something that's been changed in recent history. Even still, it's hard to get good research on the Phoenicians. They're kind of a mislabeled people, but you could think of them as like the merchants, like probably a distinct lineage of Atlantis. They were like the Freemasons. The Phoenicians were a secret society, and then they had orders and levels just like Masonry. And I talked about this with Victor when we were still doing Radio Tartary, but the highest level a Phoenician could achieve in their colony was the rank of Q. And that's kind of a hot phrase, unfortunately, but Q was called the degree of the needle, or the degree of the eye of the needle. So the letter Q represented a compass, and only the most profane of the Phoenicians could master Q. And what that meant is that you were then taught how magnetism worked, and you were shown how to navigate. And from there, you got your own ship, and you became a captain. Now, if you study enough of law of the land, law of the sea, admiralty law, this is where it all started. The Phoenicians were over here in America, I say, long before Columbus, much longer before Columbus. And you can trace the 1492 element to Sharia law and the law of the sea, admiralty law. So the Talmud, this is where it all becomes a public printed. The Phoenicians were over here, and the Sharia documents as well. Before that, long before all of America, Mexico, Peru, Tartary as we know it, Siberia, Russia, Africa, was all Arabic. The kings were Arabic. You dig enough into this, you're going to find all these people in this time frame had Arabic clothing, Arabic armor. They were wearing turbans or something similar to that. And Tartary was a name assigned to them by Rome. Same with Barbary. And this is the same time period where America is either not on maps or they pretend like they don't know what's going on there. So 1492, they introduced these two horrible corruptions. So the Talmud is a corruption of the Torah, and the Sharia papers are a corruption of the Quran. In this time period before 1492, Jews, as we know them, spoke Arabic. All of Russia spoke Arabic. The Empire of Rus is a word that's Arabic. It means, and I'm spacing what it means. It's an Arabic word. I think it means prophet or something similar to that. And, you got the empire, the Muscovies. The Muscovy is another Arabic word relating to Moses. You can find the Mexica, Mexico. They have the same word. All of the Native Americans.
The Moors are all a part of this as well, because that's also
correct,
Arabic culture. So that kind of brings us back to Spain. Yeah, exactly. So
right.
This is Moorish country, big time.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. So Moorish country was the entire world, and this you can call this the kingdom of God. People will notice, and they pointed out in this Tartary, with all these star forts, that you're going to have, a mosque, a synagogue, and a church all in the same street. And nowhere was a better representation of this than Spain. And that's because all three of these denominations were speaking Arabic. After 1492, the Jews and the Moors, the Jews of Spain all spoke Arabic. All of France didn't speak French until the late 1700s, early 1700s. They all spoke Arabic. All of the money being traded north of Constantinople, I should say north of North Africa, was Arabic. On and on. So what is Tartary? What's this explosion of it? It's the labeling of everything east and west of Rome. The expulsion of the Jews and the Moors in Spain is like kind of your kickoff point. There were some papal bulls before that and after that are a really good indicator of what the real motivation was. But it was a destruction of this kingdom of God. And Columbus, when he was going to America, he wasn't going to discover anything. He called in his own papers America India. Mexico was also labeled India. This is where you kind of start to see the maps getting screwed with. After 1492, the maps really, you can't trust them anymore. The land, how it's laid out, that may be fairly accurate, but what they're labeled is fairly inaccurate. So anyways, the Jews and the Moors are expelled, and within a 5-year period of this, the Talmud is being printed in Venice, in the Sharia papers as well. So you're kicking out a group of people, and then they're sending Columbus to wage war. So Columbus coming to America was just an extermination event. The Moors had mosques in Florida in the 1400s. America was covered by millions and millions of people. I have articles. Again, my background is research in general, but I've kind of made a niche in old newspapers just because people were freely writing about whatever was happening. They weren't as easily manipulated and controlled like today. But from California to New York, millions and millions of people, cities like you wouldn't believe. Mexico and Florida and the Gulf appeared to show a lot of examples of terraforming on a huge scale. The entire peninsula of Mexico seems to be perhaps created by man, same with the entire peninsula of Florida. Anyways, I'm going to get off topic, but yeah, well, Tartary, go ahead.
Yeah, no, the terraforming is interesting aspect of it, because something we talked about last time briefly, Mike and I, was the grid lines all over North America, but really all over the world when you dig into it. But it's not the same square grid everywhere. The grid can take different forms depending on which part of the region of the world you're in. And then also the work of Paul Cook and a lot of his boots on the ground research all over UK and Malta. You know, he's finding that the entire cliffs lines are, if you go into these little what appear to be natural formed caves from the outside, as you get deeper and deeper into them, you get to a level there where there's just block work that's clearly geopolymer, and there's, you know, straight lines separating them. These aren't just fragments in the sedimentary rock. This is clearly something that's been made. So he's shown, I think, pretty conclusively that much of the UK is created, is terraformed. That a lot of what we think of as just geology is actually construction on a scale that we can't even fathom in today's world. And Mike is zooming in there on the grid, which is, you know, just mind-numbing when you start to realize that all those little squares there, they're all exactly 1 mile square. And if you follow those lines up, or, you know, up, down, left, or right, and you keep going and going and going, those lines will hit mountain ranges, and then they'll disappear, and then they'll reappear on the other side. So clearly everything was either laid out from the air or before the terrain existed. I don't know. It starts to get really weird when you look into this and you realize the scope. And that's exactly what I was just talking about there. You can see the line is going like underneath the the terrain. So to me, that's kind of mind-numbing when it comes to the terraforming. But back to my original question about Tartary, I think you answered that pretty effectively. What we're talking about is a region that was called Tartary, and then what happened is people started to wake up to the possibility that there's a way more going on in this realm than we ever imagined when it comes to history and how widespread civilization was, whether it was the Phoenicians or the Atlanteans or whichever society it was. You find pyramids everywhere on every continent. You find star forts everywhere. You find this what they like to call a Greco-Roman architecture, this grand scale architecture everywhere. The cities, the way the grids have been laid down is incredibly complex. You've got all kinds of cymatics that are manifesting in the buildings and the cathedrals and the star forts, and what we see are the traces of a civilization that was very, very advanced technologically, even though they may have just been using everyday techniques that we could still make use of today. Everyone wants to invoke ancient aliens or some kind of high-level technology, anti-gravity devices, and I think oftentimes the explanations are a lot simpler, and that's something that Ewar and Wood and Nichols have been really driving home, is that a lot of people were making claims about Tartary and what it was or what it wasn't. And then when you go into some of those claims, you find out that they're false, because there's actually evidence, photographic and different stages of development when it comes to the building of the architecture, different kinds of technology for brick making and for literally carving columns out of stone and stuff that a lot of people are saying, oh, we couldn't possibly do that with even our technology today, and yet there are the patents, there are the pictures. So I think they're doing good work, and they're shedding a lot of light on something that needs to be talked about, in the sense that we should all be doing more research before we make claims about things. I think they kind of threw out the baby with the bathwater when they said the whole thing's just a big Russian psyop, because that misses the main point, which is that whatever you want to call this civilization, it was there, and it was widespread, and it was very comprehensive. And we'll get into that a little bit later when we start talking about canals and some things that you can look at it, and it literally will boggle your mind, just like this grid will. If you get on Google Earth and you start playing around with and just looking at those lines, you'll realize that either one, we're in a simulation, which I don't believe unless it's God's simulation, or two, this whole realm has been touched far more than you ever could have even imagined or dreamed of.
Every square inch.
So I think Tartary was a good placeholder term initially for a whole lot of different individuals. This wasn't any kind of an organized research project that had any kind of funding whatsoever. This is a bunch of keyboard warriors that are sitting at their desks trying to figure out what the heck is going on, because it doesn't take much research to start uncovering a lot of lies when it comes to things that we've been told, for example, with NASA, with the nature of our Earth in general. So then after a while you sit back and you go, okay, well, if it's not this and it's not that, then what the heck is it? And those are the kinds of questions that lead to very interesting places and interesting discoveries. And I think you guys are at the forefront of that in many ways, but you're kind of these unsung heroes. Mike is, oh, by the way, this is the maiden voyage for 13th Monkey's brand new computer. So there was a generous donation, and if anyone was more deserving of it, I don't know who. Mike has spent thousands and thousands of hours over the last 4 years or so.
Something, yeah.
Mapping in detail, and you guys will see a bit of this in a bit, and it's with far better resolution than he's ever had. So, yeah. So, but anyway, I always thought of even. I mean, there was an initial point when I saw these maps of Tartary. I was like, okay, Tartary was it. That was our lost history, and that's what has been hidden by the Scaligerine chronology, but Tartary is just a small part of that group. What would you call that greater realm, of which the Moors and the Arabs and what would that be called to you?
What do you think, Ben? Atlantis?
Yeah, Atlantis.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's kind of what a lot of people come back to. I can agree with that. As well.
Here's the trick with Atlantis. It was a confederacy essentially, and
Yeah.
no one said it better than Ignatius Donnelly, his book in the 1800s about Atlantis. He described wherever there was water and trade, that's Atlantis. And this takes you back to the Phoenicians, okay? People get hooked on the Phoenicians being some group of people, like a race or something, and that's, again, race is a new thing. Skin color, all these things, no one was identified that way 200, 300, 400 years ago. Again, the Phoenicians were like the Masons, okay? These were the people hired by Solomon, the Phoenicians, and they basically ran the show in America, and I would say in a big part of the world. And this war, where they were hunted to the ends of the earth, and it's still going on today, I would say this is, people have a lot of theories, parasite, hive mind, whatever, aliens. You could basically just take it down to power, money, mercantile exchange. A lot of horrible things came from it, slavery, so on.
Yeah, people tend to want to glorify the Golden Age, but there's like lots of pictures and maps and sketchings and drawings of some pretty hideous things that appeared to be done by the Phoenicians. Also, when you think Phoenician, you got to think Venetian, right? The same culture, really, right? Because Venice,
yes.
Venice was the seat of power during, for a period of time in the Mediterranean. And you had the Doges there, and it, it's all very sophisticated. The architecture in Venice is, next level. It's absolutely incredible. But the Phoenicians also seem to have been pretty barbaric and brutal simultaneously. Like, so were they inheritors also of this stuff?
Yes.
Yes. So that gets back to the fall of Atlantis, essentially, is what we're talking about.
Well, so there were two groups in Atlantis as well. I mean, Atlantis wasn't just made up of great people. And again, there were many Atlantises. There were cities, amazing cities all over the world that were Atlantean. But yes, it's a takeover. That's the only way that any of this could have happened. There was one particular event or a series of events that led to this, because the entire realm was decimated. And you look at enough archive pictures, when pictures first started getting publicized. I'm sure there were cameras before, but, the late 1800s. It doesn't matter where you go, everything is destroyed. And what isn't destroyed often either was taken over and repopulated and cleaned up, or it was buried under so much earth that it's still buried. Or, and me and Mike have been talking about this for years, and it overlaps with your research, and you've heard us talk about this for years. And Victor played a part in this when I first started talking about golf courses,
cement,
geomancy. golf courses are geomancy, and for people that are new to that subject, you could go even farther and call it necrogeomancy.
And when thinking of geomancy, I mean, you're basically, it's like magic. It's basically the way in which they're designing the cities, right? To make use of energy and ley lines and all of that. It's a very fascinating topic. We'll do a whole stream on that someday, because that's just completely
all this stuff. Yeah, all this stuff we're talking about today, unfortunately, I could go hours and hours and hours into, but I'm just trying to do as quick of a synopsis as I can. There was some event, I can't give a specific date. It seems like it's probably in the late 1700s, maybe early 1800s, just because of the amount of work that would be required to start things over in certain cities. But being that I live in America and I have access to an incredible amount of digital archives, and I've spent thousands and thousands of hours in them. Europe was the first to be cleaned up and repopulated. And America, there are still parts of the world that aren't even been cleaned up. And you can still see temples like this all over the stands. Afghanistan, Uzbekistan. Me and Mike have spent hours, Mongolia, Siberia, on and on. Okay, there, and just think about the northern latitudes, what's being covered there, what's covered in snow and the proverbial tundra, because Alaska was a tropical paradise only a few hundred years ago, not millions of years ago, only a few hundred years ago, less than that even. The first people exploring Alaska for the sake of finding gold and making mines were writing the most incredible stories you can imagine. I mean, I've looked through just about every article about Alaska in the 1800s, late 1800s. Obviously, it was late to join the Union, but it's incredible. From crazy dinosaurs, monsters that were being hunted by the Duke of Westminster. They were hiring people from all over the country to kill this thing. It was huge. It was like Jurassic Park. They had tropical paradises all over Alaska where the ground was so warm by some kind of volcanic function that you had tropical plants, trees, animals of all kinds, all in these little areas, 200 square kilometer areas. And they found more than one of these. Alaska was covered in, quote, Greek cities, hewn stone, massive hewn stone, canals, Greek pottery. When I say Greek, again, I think this takes us back to this Arabic kingdom of God culture. And they're all buried. There was an earthquake in Alaska in the late 1800s, and it tore off a part of a mountain. And in the mountain, they found a castle, hewn stone, Greek pottery, giant bones. This is the entire realm. Everything is like this. America, same thing. I have hundreds and hundreds of articles about stone cities, caves, the most amazing caves you could ever imagine.
Well, there are maps with large cities all over North America at the time when Columbus supposedly discovered it. I mean, it's
and Columbus was taking Arabic translators. Okay, they were labeled Hebrew, but again, there were no Hebrew people, and the Hebrew language is an offshoot of Arabic. Latin is inverted Arabic. So freehand Arabic, if you just spin the letters or use a mirror or flip them, that's Latin. So when you talk about Latin being, this sacred language that mostly just the Catholic Church uses today, well, it's inversion. This ties right in with taking over of a people and a culture, and an inversion has a lot to do with that. This necrogeomancy gets into this as well. Basically, the kingdom of God, or Atlantis, or this group that is labeled Tartary, they were building everything based on Earth's grid. Earth has a grid, an electromagnetic grid that runs underground. You call it telluric currents.
Yeah, this gets back to what Ewar and Woody, Ewar's new radio podcast is Flip Flop Productions, because he has flipped on a bunch of things, and I actually praised him for his willingness to come out and say, hey, I thought something was true before, I made claims about it, I found out that wasn't true, and so I'm here to rectify that. I think we should all be doing that if we have a public forum that we're it's one thing if you just have a thought or you say it to somebody, but if you're actually reaching a lot of people and you're claiming something as fact, and you find out it isn't, you gotta go back and say, hey, like I did that with the World's Fairs, because I thought there's no way those buildings can be made out of wood. It's absolutely impossible that something the size of St. Peter's Cathedral in Rome could possibly be made out of wood, and then along the way, after 3 years or 2 years of looking at those photographs, somebody finally finds an archive where they're actually showing every single stage of footage. Eugenie, one of the guys in the Discord, he showed that to me. So I was in a live stream and I said, hey, look at these photographs. There's a lot of things that I've been claiming that I find out, maybe they aren't necessarily true. And one of those things that Ewar kind of backed on was because he was claiming that the cathedrals were harvesting energy from the ether, and that they were tech, and that there's devices that maybe aren't even present in the buildings anymore. But there's all kinds of different ways to make use of the energy of this realm. Like there are buildings in New York that they've drilled down so far that they've got these geothermal vents. So like the buildings are literally being powered and heated by heat from deep down. So at some point they decided, okay, we're going to drill down here. They drilled down so far that it's hot enough that they can actually pump water down there. The water heats up and converts to steam, and then the steam expands 1700 to 1 in relationship to the water, and they use that to both heat and turn turbines. So that's like limitless energy, and I wonder sometimes if the nuclear power plants aren't doing something similar, and that we're being fed one story about radiation and tubes, or not the tubes, but these the things that can melt down, those I can't remember what they call them, but, like when Chernobyl and melted. Anyway, meltdown. Maybe that's not what's happening at all. I don't know. But the tech was a big one for Ewar, and I think he backtracked on that as well. And I think that was a bit hasty. Maybe he shouldn't have been making claims about it, but to just say, okay, no, we did have the means to build these buildings, and they aren't as special as I thought. Oh, your typing is really loud there, Mike.
Excuse me.
That's all right.
Yeah, he backpedaled that too much. Farmers in America and in Mexico were using iron rods and copper to electrify their fields. And they'd build poles 30, 40 feet high. And they were drawing atmospheric energy into their crops to grow larger plants. And that's just from an agricultural standpoint. Imagine what they were doing with buildings. And going back to Atlantis and connecting more dots there, Atlantis was using geothermal, Atlantis was using ley lines, and Atlantis was using natural gas. The Atlanteans were at war with giant monsters, and maybe this will be a segue. But I believe, and me and Mike have postulated this over the years of staring at all these walls and these star forts, how could a people constantly fighting each other? The Genghis Khan narrative, when you really look into it, you can dismantle it in 5 seconds. The amount of food and water that would be required for his standing army is preposterous, and you could never do it. Moving with 1,000 men on the ground is incredibly strenuous and expensive. Now, Napoleon was, 100,000. Genghis Khan, more than that, 200,000. It's utter nonsense that we were building star forts and these incredible structures all across the realm. There's nothing untouched. Nothing. From the Arctic to Antarctica, all the landmass that we are allowed to see was covered with people and buildings. There's no way you could do any of that if you're constantly trying to kill everyone around you. So that narrative, I think, is complete nonsense.
Yeah, well, that gets into a lot of the John Levy videos. He's looking at the time frames of when something was supposedly being built, and you can argue, oh, that would have been impossible in that amount of time, but the human ingenuity is pretty remarkable sometimes, and you get enough people working in harmony on a project, and things can happen very quickly. But I lost the point I was going to make there, but.
Things can definitely happen very quickly and being built up in such a fashion, but not if you look at the what you mentioned earlier, the canal systems in Africa, the ones I recently found in Mongolia, the canal systems in the United States, that's all over the world. Like Ben said, nothing is untouched. Everything that we are allowed to see.
Well, let's
nothing is untouched,
come back to that, because we're going to show some of that. I mean, we've just been talking and kind of getting acquainted here, but let me just show my screen a bit here. So, Google Earth is 13th monkey's domain, but I've used it a fair amount too. So this is where Mont Go is. People who are familiar with my channel and the work that I've done examining this mountain and looking at it from all different angles and top down, inside out. This region here in Spain.
You got to share your screen, Mike.
I'm not sharing it.
Yeah, he is. This is not me.
Yeah.
Oh.
So let me just make sure I'm doing this right, because
I'm just seeing Mongolia.
You're seeing what?
Mongolia.
You're viewing through Skype. That's the thing. Okay, wait a minute. Am I not showing?
Yeah, you're showing Spain. Don't worry, I've got the YouTube open as well.
I don't have.
I've got YouTube paused. That's why I was like, no, it's just Ben right there. So okay.
My bad.
All right. All right. Good. All right. So so that's Mont Go, and in this region, I'm pretty confident this is potentially a Titan. There's a limestone mine right here, and a portion of this whole mountain you can see is missing there, as is this portion here of Mont Go. So that's just there's a little bit of caves in here that I've yet to go in. This is another potential candidate when it comes to Titanology and this idea that maybe some of these mountains were once creatures. You can kind of see the shape of the body here. This almost looks like where the spinal column, the canal for the spinal cord would be. But there's no clear cut like caves that I can go and explore like I did with Mont Go to see if there's anything to it. The mountains are made of the same kind of stone that Mont Go is made of. It's this limestone. It's a combination of either like thick blocks that have very little in the way of channels going through them, or this Swiss cheese looking limestone that they call karst, but I believe is actually trabecular bone. So you've got the cortical bone and the trabecular bone. This is another potential candidate. There's a big cave right here. There's caves down here. I've been in them. The big one here, I didn't have a good enough flashlight, so I need to go back there another day. And then what we're going to look at today is just a little tiny star fort that's sitting right atop this little hill right here. This is a valley called Val de la Gallinera. It is absolutely pristine. I'll show you some pictures of it in a moment. But it's really cool because it's got these 7 little villages, and you come up this windy road through the valley, and you've got these just breathtaking mountains on both sides. And so this is Benirama, one of the first ones. I can't remember the name of this. You've got others the names aren't showing up on, but this is the you can barely make out on Google Earth that is even a fort. You can see a little bit of structure there. Now you can sort of see it. So this is what I'm going to show you a little bit of footage of. And the point about this is if you zoom out, I don't have the Starfort map, the Starfort file turned on. Let me just put those in Europe here. Anything else I should turn on? I guess that's enough, huh? And you can see all of these stars there. Depending, Mike has mapped them out based on color. So you've got like towers, you've got just regular castles, you've got actual star forts, and then you've got these star citadels that are just massive structures. In the last video that we did together, we were looking at this one right here, which is just a cute little 4-pointer. Where is it? There it is. So we were looking at that one last time and showed a lot of footage of that inside and out. So this is the thing. That's why it's called SFIHKAL, star forts I have known and loved, right? So this is actual places I've been to and I can talk about with a little bit of not authority, but at least some insights about what it's like. So this is the star fort we're going to look at here, and you can see it's just perched atop this little hill. It's so cool. Everybody seeing this and hear me? Is everything cool still? Make sure, check in.
Yeah.
All right, good. All right.
Yeah,
so
working from my side.
Good. So this is just the same thing, but another angle looking along the length of it. And we hiked down from above and then came down and up and around and came in this way, up this back side, the shady side there. And it is just a glorious view. That's Beni Rama, one of the 7 villages, and this is looking up the canyon from the other side. And then this mountain here, you can't make it out from this angle, but at the top of this mountain is something called Farada, which is an opening in the mountain, and we'll see that in a second. And it's you can just see the rays of light shining through. Crepuscular rays. Wow, it almost looks like the sun's really close, doesn't it? Isn't that trippy? I mean, they tell us it's 93 million miles away, but I'm sure it's just optics, right? So,
silly realm.
Yeah, wait a minute. Let me see. Oop. All right. Scroll wheel changes things. Okay, now where's the mute? I'll just. Is that really?
That little bugger. That's
I'm not hearing anything.
That's good.
Not hearing anything. Okay, well, it's not necessary.
Looks like it's got about a 6-foot wingspan. Parked.
So this is just
Right there.
this is an eagle that we saw.
Oh wow! Look at that thing.
It was just amazing watching it go.
I hope I can see it. I can't even see the screen.
So you're not hearing that.
He's just parked out.
No,
Bridge
I'm not.
Castle.
Maybe the YouTube chat is.
Yeah, the sound's working. I just
it
had it
is?
muted. That's it. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So this is what I was talking about here. So we came down from this ridge line. We came down through here, and then across this, and then the star fort is at my back right now.
Beautiful sights, yeah.
And that eagle just marking the way. Oh, by the way, a couple comments earlier. Someone mentioned Colm Gibney and Philip Druginin. Yeah, Colm was the first video I ever saw on Star Forts, and then the next video I saw touching on the theme was with you and Andreas, Mike.
Yeah, massive.
So those guys were early on. She writes, had some great Star Fort presentations a few years back. Yeah, I mean, you guys were really the first to even be talking about this. Did you see that dive the eagle took? Check that out. Watch this. He's just parked in the wind, and then right now he's going to dive down a little bit. Watch. Just tucks in the wings and down he goes.
I worked with Colm a bit in the past.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so this is coming up the backside now, going up this trail here, and it's I had to come in between here. There was gates blocking it that I had to hop over, and it doesn't look like it would have been so easy to build. You look at that. That's just straight up at the top of the rock, and to come in through this little secret path, getting close to the top. So, yeah, this is. We'll look at this area here. That's where Farada is over there. This is amazing. We'll look at that in a second. Yeah, so this is inside the Star Fort, looking down.
So, on top of a gigantic castle, or actually not gigantic, it's a smaller castle at the top of a gigantic hill with just an epic scenery. That's Val de la Gallinera, which has 7 villages. Beni Meli, I can't even remember them all. There's Beni Rama, a bunch of different ones. It's just amazing. And I'm right at the top of this Star Fort, and it's amazing. It's at the top of this mountain, and check this out, at the very top of this thing.
I need more adjectives besides amazing.
There are 2 foot thick concrete walls right there, a foot and a half, and it goes about 15 feet.
Yeah, it was so dark, and I just had my my cell phone light, so there was no point in trying to show you what was down there. But it was about a 15-foot drop, a massive, massive space. I'm guessing it was a cistern for water, but this is about a foot and a half to 2 feet thick, and that's at the very top of the fort, perched atop this massive.
Feet down, there's a water source, and it's all concrete walls down there. It's just unbelievable, the construction. And you can see the views. There's Montgo off in the distance there.
So see that? There he is. There's Monty off in the distance. Got his back to us though, so he doesn't see us.
The tail end of the elephant, and the Mediterranean. And that's the trail I came up, and I had to hop over a
It wasn't easy,
fence to get in here.
Yeah, put myself at risk for
truly an amazing spot. Saw an eagle
we need
flying
more
here a
people that
moment
get
ago. I
boots
filmed
on the
that.
ground
And
with
now
some of
I
these,
gotta
especially the castles.
get
where there's
myself
a lot
back down
to
without
see.
hurting myself. Wish me luck.
Like from some of my own experience, I can tell that looking at a star fort from the ground, not that interesting, really.
Yeah.
It's either earthworks or walls. The walls at sometimes can be really impressive, but most of the times you don't even get the idea that it's star-shaped. So you really need to appreciate them from above.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the thing. That's why I wanted to do this series also, and is because I'd been in so many of these things, and I just thought of them as medieval structures, and I never realized that there was a coherency, that there's incredibly complex geometry for the city as a whole, not just the structures in the city, because obviously the cathedrals exhibit that, and it's plain to see if you've got the eyes for it. You can see all of this is just in aggregate. It's all geopolymer. They've mixed in a whole bunch of broken chunks. You see the occasional smooth pebble in there, which I had taken to calling petrified organs, and it was just it was a glorious day with really fresh air. So I've just felt like sharing it, and you can see this windy road coming up way below. Be a good spot for a house, huh?
I'm just going to be very wise and not say anything at this point. Windy roads and stuff.
Yeah. So this is another broken, probably a container for water. And that's that gate that I had to get around, which wasn't easy. And what a sunset it was. Look at that. I had to run up the hill to catch it at the end because we had to go down from the fort, and then I'm like, no, I gotta catch it, and that was the best I could do. Now this is another cool thing. So going back to Farada. So where we were.
Gotta give it a little time for the YouTube to catch up, because the pictures you're showing are not like concurrent to what you're talking about. YouTube is currently seeing the sunset.
Gotcha.
Now we're at the castle.
Yeah, so we're back at the castle here, and then following this ridge line is where we run into Farada. Let's see. Yeah, so you can't really tell here because the detail isn't filled in, but right at the top of this peak, I'll show you some photographs here in a second. There's a massive, or not massive, but there's a big cave here, and it's all blocked off here with brick, and from the distance, if you come up the trail, you don't really, oh wait, here it is, okay. Yeah, so the cave is over here, and then this is the trail that goes up to Farada, which you'll see pictures of, but this cave is pretty fascinating as well. See that here.
Hey, Noah.
So the cool thing is I didn't even know this existed. We were just walking along the trail, and I saw this ruin, and I'm like, oh, I'll peek inside the ruin. And there was a cave inside the house, so that would have been a clever hiding spot for a whole lot of people. I think the official story is that they were using it for cattle or for ice storage.
Pretty cool.
This was built by the Moors.
Going down the rabbit hole. Got you on camera. Wow, this place is what a thing.
For those who aren't aware of me or what I do, if you have Twitter, you should definitely follow me.
Yeah, I mentioned that at the beginning, and I didn't put it in the show notes yet. But yeah, search for Waking Up with Analog on Twitter. He's got so many amazing articles, and I've shared a few of them on my community tab on my channel because they directly relate to petrified organs, petrified titans. These are the subjects that my channel has been all about. And you've found all kinds of old articles that confirm a lot of these things that I've just found, as on a
They use this for like.
Even if
since you're talking about caves, that's why I mentioned it. I have hundreds of articles on caves, and a lot of them will blow your mind.
Yep.
Caves in Colorado, like you wouldn't believe. Caves in the whole realm is covered in caves. The Ozarks is a 300-mile long cave.
Sure, I need to look into that.
The Appalachian Range has a 300-mile long cave. There are caves in Colorado where they're finding entire ships.
I'll drink the water.
Moorish ships, 60 feet below ground, petrified in a cave with Chinese hieroglyphic writing.
Right. That's crazy.
But yeah, I have articles where they're natural, and then I have ones that they're completely man-made with whole cities they discovered, avenues, 90-degree streets, roads, buildings, lamp posts, hundreds of mummies, sepulchers.
Ever burning torches in the likes of natural gas sources that don't end. That one article of the guy that found evidence of a flame that had been burning for at least 3,000 years.
Yeah. Yeah, and then they're all over. I have articles in Mexico, same thing. Miners find a cave with people with torches that are still burning. France, Germany.
It's everywhere. Like, even if you don't like Twitter, go to Twitter to look at Ben's account. That's what I do. I hate Twitter, but I go to Twitter to read what Ben is posting.
Yeah, I wouldn't even have Twitter if it wasn't for Ben, to be honest. Because I've got way too many platforms already. I'm just overwhelmed. So yeah, if you want to see some real nuggets from the past, and you can tell by the writing, it's not somebody sitting in their room that just wants to fool people and write a silly article about something. You can tell there's an authenticity to many of these texts that you can sense that they were telling things like they thought they were.
Yeah, there's one that I'd like to just read a little bit of, because I think it ties into mine and yours research. I'll just read a little bit of it if that's okay. Okay, this comes from California. This is in the 1850s. So they were using what's called hydraulics for hydraulic mining, high pressure water hoses. And they were just clearing out whole chunks of mountainside. And the things they found were crazy. So I'll just go over this. Over in Calaveras County, California, huge petrified skeletons of men are said to be quite common. Also, the bones of yet huger animals on which they used to ride, judging from the saddles, as large as dump carts, found still strapped on their backs. We helped to dig up a thigh bone ourselves over there, 15 feet long, which doubtless belonged to some antediluvian chief. Some called it an old log, but it was in the shape of a thigh bone, petrified.
Oh wait, I just want to add, if that was a thigh bone and it was 15 foot long, then the tibia would have been probably 10 or 12. So just the leg would have been 25 feet in length. So that's without the torso.
Yeah. We have never known many complete stone giants to be exhumed in this vicinity, but out in Humboldt County, one large body over 100 feet long, known as the Little Giant, has been found completely petrified.
I was with you until you said Humboldt, but I know the kind of people that hang out in Humboldt, and this is no longer a credible story.
Yeah. But here's the important part, and it's going to tie into what you're doing. So the Little Giant has been found completely petrified into quartz and silver ore.
Ha.
Okay.
That's really interesting, actually. Yeah.
Okay. It is well known to us that all the petrified horses are plenty in the Comstock Ledge. Some of them over 50 feet high. Also, numerous huge spurs. For those who don't know what a spur is, that goes on the back of your boot, which none but the monstrous men could appropriately wear. Petrified wild cats have also been found throughout this mining region. So that's just a synopsis, but I like that one because we're talking about 100 plus foot men, 50 foot plus horses, giant saddles, spurs, and these petrified creatures are turned into quartz and silver ore. So me and Mike, both of us, Mike and Mike, have been hypothesizing for years, excuse me, that the mining industry is all organic. Humans, plant matter, trees. A tree can create almost any mineral, especially through petrifaction, as can a human.
Yeah, I just want to add to that's exactly what Hangman 1128 is working on right now, because he's got so much footage of the giant titanic trees and all the different ways in which they break down and they manifest, and that includes all sorts of different kinds of sap and all the various types of quartz crystal that manifest, but not just quartz, everything. He's showing that the trees are manufacturing everything, and this gets into biogeology, the biological transmutation, that something has gone from once being a living tree, whether it was silicon or carbon based, I don't care, but it went from that to being stone. And in order for that to happen, there had to be some kind of a transmutation, because to just claim that it's happening through paramineralization, where there's a replacement of minerals, that doesn't make sense to me at all. So I think that some kind of a petrification event has taken place. But even without a petrification event, you still have the biological transmutation of elements, where trees and plants and creatures, of all different kinds, are synthesizing the elements. So they're taking different things and they're producing them. And we're taught that can't happen. That has to happen in the heart of stars. It takes supernovas to spread that stuff out throughout the universe. And then it all coalesces and accumulates thanks to the magic of gravity. And then boom, we've got, monkeys with computers. So definitely the trees are the great trees are a real thing, and they're producing just about everything. Is one of your youngsters awake?
No, my dog. One of many. But yeah, I could read articles all day.
We could sometime we'll do a stream with going through a bunch of those articles and just talking about them, because it's very, very interesting stuff. Yeah, big shout out to Hangman1128. He's if you want proof, unequivocal proof that the great trees were once a thing, his channel is the place to go, because you can look at the pictures of the plateaus all day long. You can debate whether basalt columns can actually be formed by volcanic activity or whether those are the fibers of something great that was once growing. I believe the latter. But besides the mesas and looking at these columns and everything, if you see his footage, you'll see all the different ways in which the great trees manifest, and it's fractal, and it goes all the way down to little chunks that you can hold in your fingertips that are identical to what you're seeing on the larger scale, and that's exactly how the trees break down. So if it isn't great tree eroding in one way or another, it's pretty odd that it lines up in every single possible way.
Yeah, and everything's buried below ground. A lot of my research has also been about kind of rewriting biblical history and hypothesizing that Babylon and Egypt, Canaan is all in America. And the things they find in these underground caverns will blow your mind. Mummies. I have articles showing that almost all of the mummies in European museums came from America, not from Egypt.
Well, this gets into the whole Smithsonian squirreling away everything that doesn't fit the narrative, right?
Yeah, and I have plenty. Again, I have over 6,000 posts, and that's not even a fraction of the articles I have. And I have dozens on the Smithsonian articles talking about how they're corrupt and they're sending everything overseas and they're rewriting history and they're protected by the government, and the things they couldn't steal, they would just buy. I have articles that the Smithsonian was also hiring big game hunters to kill dinosaurs, giant sloths, you name it. So any kind of old world, crazy fantasy type animal creature you can think of, unicorns. The Smithsonian was aware of the last vestiges of them that were alive after the deluge, and they were paying people. They put out a bounty on a dinosaur in the Congo in the 1800s, and it was $5 million.
Bembe, right?
How much was $5 million in the 1800s? A lot.
A whole heck of a lot. Ben, I don't know. Someone mentioned that your mic is a lot louder, and I'm sure there's some way I can control that from here, but I don't know how. So maybe if you can just turn it down a little bit and see if that's better for people.
Is that better?
It was fine for me all along, but I'm just going from some feedback in the chat.
Yeah, I can't hear myself, unfortunately.
There's some I was going to mention. Yeah, there was that we talked about Colm Gibney and Philip Drugin, and then someone else wrote, if I can remember correctly, it was John Levy who posited the idea that Starfort is the bedrock level, and that's consistent with what I've found around here. You've got definitely the traces of all kinds of geopolymers, but when you look at what these starforts are sitting on, and actually what they're made from. They're sitting on the bedrock, which is this limestone that's got all these channels going through it. So this ties into my theory that they were mining titans, and that this is what they used for their materials to build the realm. Obviously there's tons of examples of geopolymer, and a lot of the megalithic architecture seems to have been done in that fashion. So it's not anti-gravity devices needed to build the pyramids. You could just build frames and pour whatever kinds of stone you wanted if you had the recipe and knew how to do it. So that's definitely happening, but that's not what these starforts are sitting on. They're sitting on the bedrock, which I believe is either in some cases it may be great tree, and in other cases it's potentially titan. Yeah, that was Cat Links that added that comment. So, yeah, and a lot of John Levy's been under fire a lot for different claims and laziness and research and that sort of thing. And I feel like people are kind of missing the point. This is a guy on his own, out in the middle of nowhere, just checking stuff out, talking about things that he thinks is unusual. He's very artistic and poetic in the way that he presents himself, and it's really easy to speculate and talk about things, and maybe you don't qualify every single thing you say with, oh, this may not be a fact, every time you say something. But I've learned so much from him over the years, and he's done so much interesting research that I think again, people are they're so quick to criticize and go on the attack instead of just taking things for what they are and appreciating what's been done. It doesn't mean that there shouldn't be more systematic, organized, collective research that's even looking at maybe someday approaching academia. But the problem is our whole historical system, the academic institutions, all the societies that are supposed to be the upper echelons of academia. A lot of all of that is questionable when it comes to motives and people just supporting narratives rather than actually looking at the evidence that's there with an open mind and considering things that we think are absurd. There might be actually some truth to them.
Well, and we can talk just about John Levy's area for a second. Utah, Arizona, Colorado, New Mexico was the base of a gigantic civilization.
Can you fly the mic? I'll go to content view. So if you want to show any things that he's talking about.
I have really great articles again from that region. Dragons, whole dragons, 100+ foot dragons found below ground, skeletons petrified.
Yeah, I posted one of yours on the community tab that was a 300-foot dragon that was found intact underground.
Mm-hmm. And there I have a really interesting one about two prospectors. They were they got lost, and they stumbled upon an entire Egyptian culture, a whole city in a basin, thousands and thousands of people, Egyptian temples, crazy cave systems. One of the guys died. One of the guys made it out, but he lived with these people for a while. And the only way out of this basin was you had to ride this makeshift boat through a subterranean river. Anyways, this area was something really, really special before this event that we've talked about so many times. I think that it's definitely possible there was more than one event. The buried record shows not only a flood, but a fire. The Mayan cosmology talks about the Earth being destroyed or reset 4 times, and flood and fire are 2 sections of that.
Yeah, even mainstream geology gives us 5 great resets, right? These, you had the period of the dinosaurs and when the trilobites were around, and so they're even in their narrative, there's a lot of talk about major cataclysms, whether they're volcanic or strikes from interstellar projectiles.
Yeah, and the LDS Church has a lot of amazing articles because they were leading all of the expeditions for the most part in the Southwest here, especially in the mid to late 1800s. And it's pretty amazing. I mean, thousands of mummies, relics like you couldn't believe, giant red-headed people. I have Rebrew. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay. Someone's speakers were playing me back. Anyways, it's an incredible place. So we're talking about dragons. We're talking about giants. They found a city below ground where they found a bunch of giant red-headed giants, 15 to 20 foot. And they found a pictorial on all the walls. The walls were all plastered. Okay, stone walls covered in plaster. They had pictures telling stories. And all the pictures were telling the story that these people were at war with giant cats, giant, like, saber-tooth type animals. And the king was made king because he had killed one of these giant cats. And I have articles of miners in cave systems running into lions. So it's just crazy. Everything we're told is backwards. You can trace almost all the plants and animals historically to this continent. Camels come from America. Every kind of elephant.
Marsupials.
All marsupials. The big cats. They all come from here.
It's almost like this place, America, was Middle Earth. Or did I say too much?
Oh, yeah.
Just if people are watching, like Mike was sharing my screen, I think. If anybody knows the old map of Tolkien's Middle Earth, and you can see my mouse pointer, Mordor, right there. That's it. There's your Sea of Rune, the Southlands. So you would have your Rohan, sort of right here in the plains. Mirkwood. And there's the Shire.
It's funny, too, because there's quite a historical record of pygmies.
Numenor.
All across the northwest there, where he was just pointing in my home state of Oregon. They have pretty amazing articles extending all along that volcanic range right there. If you look, zoom in a little bit more. If you see the Yakima Indian Reservation, all along right down there through the middle of Washington and Oregon, there's some of the biggest volcanoes in America. And you can see them.
The white dots are pretty much the volcanoes.
But all the Native Americans, and then there's Crater Lake. Zoom in right there where you just were. Keep going down.
This
See
one?
that lake? Yeah, it's the deepest lake, second deepest lake in the world. And
Wizard Island, huh?
Yeah.
Had some comments in the chat about my volume level. Is that better now?
You sound, all of you sound fine, so I don't know what it is. Must be YouTube. It's a magical place. A lot of weird things happen here.
Mud Fossil Gaia writes, I have a playlist about Native American mud fossil legends on my channel if you'd like to see more dragons and hear their stories.
Oh, man. The Native American stories are great. It goes right back to Tolkien. Me and Mike are big Lord of the Rings fans, and, he wrote those books, and he didn't say it publicly, but the people close to him said that he believed this was the true history of Earth. And my articles, just coincidentally, I never really went looking for that, have shown that. I have dragons, giants, dwarfs living in caves hoarding gold. This is 100% what they were writing about. Pygmies, orcish type hybrids that were thick-boned, thick-skulled, 6 fingers, double rows of teeth. I have skeletons with tails, skeletons with fins, like mermaids, skeletons with single and double sets of horns on their head. It's crazy. It's far more magical of a realm than we think.
Yeah.
Like what you said earlier about the walls, I think is pretty important in relation to the states too, considering the amount of articles you have on walls.
Yeah, everywhere.
Just strengthening the fact, and another thing that strengthens that theory is star forts are mostly on the northern hemisphere.
Yeah.
Don't like the word, but you know what I mean.
Hemisplane.
Yeah.
Hemispane. Thank you.
Right, and this is what we touched on just a little bit earlier, but we didn't really go into it too much.
Yeah, I wonder why they don't have an AE projection on Google Earth. You should be able to just click a button and see it all laid out like a pizza, but I guess they wouldn't want people to have that view.
No, can't have that.
I didn't really summarize this too, but I want to make this point. I do think that the star forts served multiple purposes. I completely agree that they were built upon living or old living structures. They were also built on or near waterways. Some were built on top of hills, but the majority of them are built along rivers.
Yes.
And most of them had giant walls. They were all connected. When me and Mike first started talking
most
to
of
each
what
other,
had giant walls? Sorry, I missed what you were
Star
Most of the
forts.
forts.
Ah, right.
When me and Mike first started spending time together on Google Earth, me and him knew very little of the forts in America. But over time, we found many, many maps showing that America, from east to west, has as many, if not more, star forts than Europe. America, unfortunately, was buried under what seems to be a considerable larger amount of mud than Europe.
Oh, can I just interject real quick on that topic?
Yeah.
Because someone was just asking about volcanoes, and that ties into something I wanted to talk about with volcanoes. But before we go there, this ties into the whole narrative that Randall Carlson and Graham Hancock are promoting, which is this whole comet strike during the Younger Dryas period that was like 12,500 years ago when everything got wiped out. And that whole, if you could just go to the Pacific Northwest there, Mike, like zoom in on especially eastern Washington, there's an area there called Dry Falls that basically it's the biggest waterfall that ever existed on Earth. If you look at it geologically, it's like 1,000 times bigger than Niagara, and so
I've been there.
So there's these theories that they have about a 2 to 3 mile thick ice layer that was all over Northern America, or North America. Like 2/3 of North America was covered under this. And they theorize that there was a comet that came into the atmosphere and it broke off into multiple fragments, and they all hit in that region. And there's a big area that just vaporized, and it sent gigantic boulders, moving, and just like the likes of which the world had never seen before. And they believe that this happened in a very short amount of time as a result of some kind of a comet strike. But I don't believe that, because I think a lot of what we're told about space is BS, and NASA and SpaceX have no credibility in my mind. So that begs the question, like, where are we? What is this place? And what's outside? Is there a barrier? Is there not a barrier? What is the shape? That's a whole topic for another time. But this area is fascinating because of the traces of this major event. Now, going back to volcanoes, and Mike was looking at some stuff earlier today, and I was just thinking, or like just minutes ago, I was thinking about trees versus volcanoes. And if the ancient trees were a thing, we were looking last night all over Madagascar. We could go there shortly, or he's going there already. there, Madagascar looks like a forest. You've got these rings all over. They're about 8 miles in diameter. If you tilt it and you look at them from the side, you can see grain, and it is very clearly tree. And again, if you haven't gone into Hangman 1128's footage, you really need to do that in order to be able to start to make sense of how this place is put together, because they're telling us that these, you can't see the grain so clearly here, but some of them you can see. It looks exactly like a tree trunk, and they're all tilting up at this sloping angle of where that outer ring, the main ring there, they're all tilting up as if they're about to go parallel, parallel to each other and vertical to the ground, exactly as a tree trunk would. So what happened to those trees? I don't know. But if things were that big and those trees are not here anymore, then, Paul Bunyan myths and these things of the, or just like the movie Avatar, they could have brought in some kind of, laser technology, who knows what. But, that suggests that there's other realms that things were shipped to, obviously, because the traces are not there anymore. But
let's stay on that Avatar thing for just a split second, okay? I hate to be a broken record, but when they were chopping down a lot of these really big trees, they were finding mounds or graves underneath them. So one of the tenets or commonalities you find is that they would bury a tree or plant a tree on top of a grave. And so, like, some of these monstrous trees in the 1800s, they were cutting down. Anyone that's looked into that, they were finding giants buried underneath them, and that alone is crazy. I just posted an article the other day about the largest living cypress in Florida was cut down, and they estimated it to be over 1,000 years old, and they found a petrified giant underneath it.
I'm just going to show some pictures of the trees while you're talking, just so you know, Mike, that I've got the screen now. Yeah, keep going.
And Native American mythology says that when you plant a tree on, that the tree absorbs your essence, essentially, right? And anyone that's seen the movie Avatar, that movie is, truth is stranger than fiction, I would say, is very accurate. Under the California redwood forest is some of the largest crystal caves in North America. Hyperion, which is a giant, it's the tallest tree in the world currently, sits on top of a giant crystal cave. And we were just talking earlier about when you petrify a human or organic matter, it turns into silver, gold, crystal. So in that movie Avatar, they need, I think it was unobtainium, I can't remember the exact name. And where is it? It's at the base of their giant tree.
Unobtainium.
Yeah, unobtainium. Which
and the tree is Awa, right? Isn't that what it's called in the movie?
Yeah.
I think the Tolkien stuff and the look at this tree. That's Hyperion. This Tolkien stuff and Avatar. Like, Avatar was the top-grossing film of all time, and Tolkien obviously has etched an indelible mark in everybody's consciousness. I think that's because they're telling the true stories, and we intuitively sense that there's a truth there. This particular tree isn't that? Didn't you tell me it's right above the crystal caves? Look at that thing.
It's connected to it. Yep.
Yeah, I've been inside of those, and boy, would I love to go back inside of them now, because I have a completely different perspective on this whole idea of biogeology and what. Yeah, I've been to General Sherman. I've never seen Hyperion. This is the redwood. That's the one I just showed pictures of. I got pictures of me trying to get my arms around this thing. It takes I can't remember if it's 26 men fingertip to fingertip or 36 men, but It's I think it's the largest tree in the world by volume, but it's not the tallest and it's not the widest. I think that's its claim to fame. But because I
Yeah,
remember,
that's correct, Mike.
is that correct? Yeah. And
Yeah.
I mean that's just a magnificent. That's General Sherman there, or maybe that's Hyperion.
Hyperion is the tallest, General Sherman is the largest by volume, and the oldest tree is somewhere in Sweden.
Yeah, it's it's in Lapland. It's in Siberia. They say it's like 9,000 miles or 9,000 years old.
Yeah.
And it just makes me wonder, like, how do they determine that?
Can you look up
Cut it down,
Montezuma's
count the
cypress? It's in Oaxaca, Mexico. Montezuma's cypress.
Yeah, that's impressive too.
This one blew my mind. This supposedly was planted when he was king, but I doubt that because it's probably 2,000 years old.
I'm not sure if that. Well, there's a tree that's a fig tree in Santa Barbara, that looks like that. And also the banyan trees can get really, really large, the trunks, but they also shoot off branches, and then those branches become fig tree. Oh, there it was. Those branches become new trunks, so it can take up a huge. So this is one that's in Santa Barbara that I used to sit on. It was pretty amazing, that tree. But the one Montezuma's cypress, that's amazing. And then you got the baobabs as well. We were talking about the baobabs before, weren't we, Mike? What was that? Didn't you?
That's what I said the other day when we were looking at Madagascar. That's where the baobab tree originates from.
Oh, just to finish.
So it spread its way all over southern Africa,
Right.
but
Right.
it originates from Madagascar.
Right. So maybe those circles that you were showing were originally the giant version of the baobab, because the cedars that Hangman is showing all over Colorado and I think Wyoming, those match, like the vast majority of the smaller trees that are there that are still living now. Those would have been like moss compared to the great trees, but it's the same for the most part. The majority of the trees that are in that area are the same variety as the gigantic version. So it's like downsizing. You know, we went down a fractal level into more detail, but we lost the bigger stuff.
It's the lack of oxygen.
I just came across this picture, and I just wanted to finish the thread from earlier when we were looking at these. I got on the trees there for a second, but I want to pull up, go back to the topic of the day, which is star forts that I've known and loved, and just finish up this little thread here, because we were inside this cave. Where is it? Here we go.
Cave is not a star fort.
No, I know. No, but it's just I showed this footage here in this Moorish place where they either kept cattle or just hid as they were under siege. They could hide in this. And if you look here so this is looking across, and here is Farada, which is this is hole. I'll show you some pictures of that in a second. But I'm looking through a man-made wall, and you can see that. Let me just finish the last part of this video. So that's the natural formation of the cave, and then here you can see that I'm inside this aggregate, and the aggregate is always limestone with iron, and usually they'll have little chunks of either broken fragments of limestone, or they'll have these smooth pebble stones that I call petrified organs. That's a cool shot there. Hold on, just gotta take a snapshot of that. There we go. And so close that up. And it just reminded me of this, because this is what it looks like. This is from the outside looking in. So I was either looking through, it must have been this hole, because I don't think we didn't go down that far. But that must mean there's a lower level that I wasn't aware of. So I wonder where the entrance to the lower level is. That's an interesting thought. Huh. Whoop.
Yeah, and I have a really interesting article from South Dakota. They found a cave that was miles long. They couldn't even explore it all. And the ceiling was over 900 feet high. And they found a living forest with trees that were at least 300 feet tall. This is the 1800s.
Mm.
I have tons of petrified trees that are over 1,000 feet long. So yeah, I agree. I think each reset things got smaller, or there was one big jump. That seems most realistic.
Well, and isn't that another thing they like to show us in Hollywood? The whole downsizing and Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, and it's this
Mm-hmm.
whole idea of like maybe that's how they deal with the population issue instead of killing everybody off with the magic juice or some kind of an electric grid system. Um, they just make everybody smaller. Hold on, I was just going to show this. These are called Moorish caves, and this is not in this region, but to me, there's all this talk about the melted buildings, and I think there's evidence for that also. But the people who are into that, they tend to try and apply that thinking to everything, and I don't think it applies. You've got that gets back to that unanswered question of like, what are volcanoes as well? Because when we're talking about resets, I brought up the Younger Dryas and the Comet Strike and Graham Hancock and the devastation that you can clearly see there on the west side of the U.S. And the question is, if it wasn't some outer space event, what would have caused that kind of cataclysm? And if you just show the Pacific Rim, Mike, with the all the volcs, the volcanoes. Like, imagine a situation where, like, all of that erupted at the same time. Let's see, content view. There's just so many of them. And then there's all of the underwater ones. They say there's over 1 million underwater volcanoes as well. And then there's mud volcanoes. This is something I didn't even know about until a few years back when I started trying to understand what I was finding with Montgo and the petrified heartstones, is that mud volcanoes are a very real thing. You can find video it's in my Petrified Titans and Organs Part 1 or Part 2 videos. There's footage there of mud volcanoes going off, and it's like, it's so easy to conceive between the volcanoes and mud volcanoes that this realm could easily have been inundated, and the volcanoes could have caused earthquakes, which then could have caused tsunamis, and so you would have just had a mishmash of everything from lava to mud to all of the devastated debris that got wiped out as the tsunami struck. So it's the traces of it all are there.
Yeah, and some of the early mining.
Yeah, Tambora is one of the biggest, right, Mike? Go zoom in on that close. Uh-oh. Mike, you still there? I can't hear you. You're muted.
Yeah, I don't think he knows who's
Sorry. Tambora is not one of the biggest, but it is one of the loudest sounds recorded in history.
Okay. Yeah, so I've been on volcanoes. Like I went to Santorini. If you fly there quick, that's an interesting one because that's a volcano inside of a volcano, right? It's still got an active central portion. And when that
there's several of those that are.
Yeah, when that one in particular, Santorini, when that blew its top, it wiped out the Minoan Empire, right, overnight, basically, because the Minoan Empire was centered in Crete, which was southwest of there, and that was a big island for the centers of their, at least by the mainstream narrative that I learned at university. And so that whole central water portion there, that was originally mountain, and that blew. And so I went to that, go zoom in again to the small island, took a boat ride out to the central portion, and that's the only place I've ever been where if you dig in the sand with your hands, you start to pull away the sand, and normally, like if you're at the beach and you dig down, it gets cooler and cooler. But when
it's hot.
being on this thing, you dig in, and the further you go down with your hands, the hotter it gets to the point where you can't dig anymore. That's really trippy. That's when you know you're on a volcano. So that is different from the look. I mean, that's obviously in the water, so you can't see the edges. But that's different from the looks of these things that look like tree stumps, like what we were looking at in Madagascar. And then that kind of gets back to, you know, what I was starting to show before, which is example of the great trees, which I've shown now in several videos, because I just recently, I just kind of got obsessed with the whole topic, because it really, when you can prove that to yourself beyond a shadow of a doubt that those trees were real, and it's not just, you know, the tree stumps that we can argue about, oh, maybe they were giant slag heaps, or maybe they were just areas where, you know, the ancient miners came in and scooped away and they just left, like you know, Mike was showing Monument Valley in, what was that, Utah before, or, you know, these they look like tree stumps, but maybe it's actually just the remains of what wasn't mined away, you know, but when it comes to the work of Hangman, you can see the actual remains of the fragmented tree stumps. So not just the ones that are chopped off at the top. And then you've got the volcanoes, which, you know, that's a totally different look. There's stuff coming up from below. It's hot. So if that's some kind of a technology that's controllable, you know, there's no telling what's possible when it comes to.
Well, again, I have hundreds of articles about the comets, meteors, aerolites, whatever you want to call them, and they're magnetic. And volcanoes have been proven to be magnetic, and that when a comet or a meteor is in the sky, these mountains can actually switch polarities overnight. Mm-hmm. And I think this is what could cause eruptions. Yeah, the things they were writing about volcanism and comets and meteors and aerolites in the late 1700s, early 1800s is mind-boggling. They basically were saying that whether everything magnetism related was directly affected. You'd have a cold winter or a hot summer. Mountains that were never thought to be volcanoes could become volcanoes overnight. And I think these things are directly related. You study any religion, and they're almost all based on a deity that lives inside of an aerolite or a magnetic stone. That alone is really interesting. Basically, magnetism is a living thing, essentially, is what their opinion was. And that when these aerolites would fall from the sky, they would collect them, and they become an idol of sorts. But every sacred place to all religions in the world, and even their subsidized or subsidiaries churches around the world, they all had a magnetic stone.
Right, that ties into your Mount Meru,
right.
Rupus nigra, or negra, mm-hmm. And also the world tree being cut down in some myths, right? That you've got, what is it, Valhalla? Is that wasn't that a great tree? Yggdrasil, right? Is Valhalla?
Yggdrasil, yeah.
That's of the Scandinavian Nordic traditions. So yeah, our mythologies are telling us all this stuff. We've got Avatar, we've got Tolkien, we've got all of the ancient myths, and we grow up being taught that that's the fantasy. But the reality is we're going to space, and we got to get off this little rock soon. Otherwise, we're going to get hit by another rock. And so we need trillions of your dollars in order to make this possible. And that would all be great if they seemed to really be doing it. But you know, you start to dig into the footage and dig into the claims and dig into the actual science and dig into the empirical reality that we're in, and what happens when you start to measure it with long distance optics or lasers or, you know, you name it. And And things are not always as they appear.
No, and there's quite a lot of evidence out there that these aerial bodies could turn direction instantly, and that they moved with intelligence. And there were even religious groups that believed you could steer them with prayer. That alone is quite interesting. And yeah, there's when you really dig into the Ben stone.
Yeah, and even if space is fake, it doesn't mean that those objects in the sky that have been recorded by everyone throughout history, were fake. That stuff's real. That's part of the historical record. In fact, somebody mentioned Archaics and says that Archaics has date information that lines up with our muses. And I've listened to a lot of his content, and I'd like to talk to him actually, because I want to hear his thoughts on petrification and the things that he's come across in his studies, because the guy is incredibly scholarly, and he's one of the most well-read people I've ever met, alongside you. But he's got timelines and chronology lined up for all of these different calendars and showing how they overlap, and that these different nodal points, he talks about this 138-year Phoenix cycle, and that ties into the plasma apocalypse and the EMCO of Chris Austin Lambert, I think was his channel name. So Medusa, the glittering sword of God, the Younger Dryas event, all these things are speaking about the same stories, but different names for the people involved or the gods involved, and different names for the locations, and different names for everything, it seems. So it makes it hard to make sense of it. But that's what a lot of people are starting to do. They're always mocking the flat earthers because they don't have a model. It's like, hello, we have no budget. They have billions and trillions. We can't get outside of it if it is enclosed, so we can't tell you what it is outside because it would only be speculation. And they're constantly like, well, where's your model? And actually, they're the ones who need to present the coherent model. And I say, well, we have one because we can predict this and we can predict that. But yeah, eclipses are predictable because they happen with cyclic repetition. So there's a lot of examples of things that are predictable that don't require the heliocentric model that NASA and SpaceX are supporting. But.
Yeah, and you used a good word there. And I'm familiar with Archaics. I like a lot of his work. I don't obviously agree with everything, but his Phoenix phrasing is really important because this is an aerolite. Remember, the Phoenix is the Bennu bird, and the Bennu bird is a representation also of the Ben stone. This just takes you back to whatever this reset mechanism is. It is electromagnetic, and it is either triggered or in some way related to the Ben stone, and perhaps it's triggered by a comet.
Yeah, when you're talking about the Ben stone, I'm just thinking ancient technology, or we would call it magic or wizardry. This is when you talk about the Ark of the Covenant. There are these different great artifacts that have existed throughout history that have been written about that seem to be imbued with all kinds of power and allow you to manipulate the realm in different ways. That's what the Ben stone, isn't it? Right? Wasn't that supposed to be the capstone of the Great Pyramid as well?
Correct. Yeah. It's just a gigantic aerolite, or stone that fell from heaven. And guess what they're predominantly made from? Iron. They did a lot of experiments with different ones in the mid 1800s, but they found that whenever you connected them to a battery, they came alive. And the Aurora Borealis was manipulated and did all kinds of crazy things when aerolites or comets were in the air. And yeah, historical narratives about the sky falling, and the Archaics guy, he talks about events where mud fell from the sky and all kinds of stuff. And all of these things are all interrelated.
Yeah.
And
Well, and that's the thing I keep coming back to is everyone wants to point fingers at each other and call each other shills and say, "Oh, he flip-flop and he said something different before," and but ultimately, when we're looking at a lot of this stuff, I think there's a lot of people that are doing that have pieces of the puzzle, but they haven't seen how those pieces fit in with other things. And so I keep coming back to E, all of the above. It's A, B, C, D, and E. And
it's also a process of learning, right? I mean, you go through your research, and over time you find out that something isn't what you thought it was, and you come back at it.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, that's how it should work.
You have changed your opinion on the matter, right? It doesn't mean that somebody else's opinion changes, but...
And if you don't do that based on new information that conflicts with what you believed before, then you're pushing dogma, essentially, especially if it's in alignment with what everyone else believes, which is oftentimes not correct.
That ties neatly into this question: what is Tartaria? Right?
Yeah, I mean, the reality is, even if you weren't looking at history from, this sculptured narrative, if you really break everything down into just trying to, the whole concept of the red pill, all that really means is that you kind of got, your rose-colored glasses have been taken off, and once they're off, they can never be put back on, and you can never take them off of someone else. And essentially, once you become responsible for your own knowledge, essentially, that's kind of when it all starts. Narrow is the path. These Christ-like figures are always labeled as a door. You stand on the threshold, and only you can make the decision to step through it, right?
100%.
This is like Neo in the Matrix. That movie's more of a documentary.
Yes.
Than anything else. Yeah, and that when you unplug, okay, right? Neo's plugged in through the back of his brain. This takes you back to what I was talking about earlier with the letter Q. The highest fraternal order or level in the Phoenician order was Q. Not only did it mean you were granted the gift of the knowledge of magnetism, you also became a captain of your own ship. Now, when you study admiralty law and law of the land, this is incredibly important because the government labels you as a ship with no captain. So it's all interwoven. And when you study the Hebrew alphabet, the letter Q is also represented by the back of the head. So essentially, the waking up process, or Q, and then you also have Neo, neodymium. Neo, the character, is named after neodymium, one of the most powerful magnets there is. So it's just, again, it's just this interlaced.
Going back to Q, I was thinking of the work that you and Victor did some years ago, where you were looking at the Celtic traditions, and that there was this rivalry that existed between the Q Celts and the P Celts, and that you guys were actually documenting quite extensively, almost like an overthrow through language, where the Qs were being systematically replaced by Ks. And if you go back to the Algonquins, for example, and you go back to these ancient cultures, there seems to be this kind of attempt to sweep that letter under the carpet, which is a very fascinating thing, because the 17th letter takes on a whole different significance when you bring it into the present day and all the power struggles that are occurring. And that's where I find that research that the two of you did to be so fascinating. But it's also
right.
It's also very much a hot potato that gets channels taken down very quickly. So we won't go into too much detail about that, but
yeah, we don't have to talk about the current political theater part of it or any of that stuff, or the quote-unquote QAnon stuff. That really wasn't anything I was too interested in. It was more the historical narrative. And, I've been talking on public forums like this about language for years now. and the manipulation of language is incredibly important. And this is what we talked about, the first 10 minutes of the show was Arabic. It almost all goes back to Arabic, and it's really amazing. The Q is a big part of that. And you can find it all over China. You can find it in Africa, Peru. It was everywhere. And it is this root language that is kind of the Babel narrative. And when peoples are conquered, their languages are changed. Those things go hand in hand. When people are murdered and slaughtered and their culture's destroyed and their language is rewritten. And this has happened hundreds and hundreds of times.
A set of lies agreed upon, right? That's attributed to Napoleon.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, I haven't seen it yet, but Andreas did a video recently with Ewing, I think is his last name, and
David.
Napoleon.
He's fantastic.
Yeah, Napoleon didn't exist, so the idea that this might be a fictitious figure that was created for the purposes of justifying political narratives, and there's so much
I think he was just a reset figure, like many. You hear about Napoleon's comet. I don't think Napoleon existed, right? Think about it. If we're talking about movies are more truth than they are fiction, well, the fiction story of Napoleon arriving in Russia, and he didn't even need to do anything. He walked right in because a comet beat him there and destroyed the city. Well, he doesn't need to exist, really. And the more you dig into Napoleon, you find a bunch of holes. But going back really quick to the letter Q, another thing I've been talking about for years about the Q is alchemy. This ties in with mining and mineralogy, and Q in alchemical works is the quintessence, or the fifth element. And this is such an important thing. It kind of relates to taking the red pill essentially and becoming self-aware. That's kind of what quintessence is. And how hard that can be, again, the Neo concept, he unplugs and he's not comfortable, he's eating slop, it's like when you leave behind the matrix, like,
why oh why didn't I take the blue pill, right?
Yeah, it's a rocky road, and a lot of people aren't ready to take those glasses off.
Some of us never had a choice. It's like from early on, I was red pilled. So, once you see that there might be other interpretations to things, and start pulling back the veil and looking behind stories, that's when you find out there's a whole lot of funny business. So.
Yeah, and the Phoenicians are remnants of Atlantis, and they were all over America, and David Ewing Jr. that Exertus has interviewed. Mm-hmm. He's, I've said his name before. He's probably one of my favorite researchers, because he summarizes the historical timeline gaps better than anyone I know, and that really is going to show exactly what we've been talking about, that they've stretched all of this historical storyboard over several thousand years, and it's really just all really very small. And 200, 300 years ago, this culture and the world looked very different.
Well, and as far as the timeline goes, this is basically what Fomenko is putting forth.
And David,
there's 1,000 years.
Discusses.
David is in alignment with that. Yeah, and that, it's hard to imagine, but basically, when you look at the I and the J that are on the old maps for the dates, you understand that, that could be, the year of our Lord Jesus, or with an I, Jesus or Jesus, and so that one is often represented as an I or a J on these old maps and these old buildings. So then it's this idea that by interjecting 1,000 years into history, they've got to whole lot of wiggle room to play with history in order to make things line up the way they
Exactly.
want them to with their narratives.
Create characters.
Yeah, hence all the different calendars, and this is what Archaics has done. He's, with his Chronicon, from what I understand, is that he's lined up all these different timelines, and he's using these Phoenix events, that's how he discovered the Phoenix event, I guess, is by lining this up and seeing that there were these key moments in history across all civilizations where these cataclysmic events had happened. Well, Fomenko is looking at things like eclipses, which again happen very cyclically, and that's why you can use something like an Antikythera instrument and predict them all to perfection. And that was how he mathematically, I guess, determined that things weren't lining up, and there was a whole bunch of fudging that had taken place in the historical record. And that was, he's written something like 100 books now on the subject, right? I haven't read a single one, so don't take my word for any of this. Go look into it yourself. But I think it's fascinating to ponder, and I don't have any faith in Scalagerian chronology at all. There's a wonderful series by a guy named Jan Irvin with Logos Media, where he I can't remember the name of the gentleman who was presenting the data, but he had so much evidence to go through for primary sources, firsthand references showing that Joseph Scaliger was a total fraud, and basically at some point the whole world decided to toe the line and accept Scalagerian chronology as gospel, and it's anything but that from what I understand.
Yeah, it's like Copernicus, and that's why I fell in love with newspapers because you can see people freely speaking about all of these things: timelines, the earth shape, narratives of war, creations of countries, Standard Oil, royal families, anything you want to know. You can get a very honest, well-researched opinion by just looking through the historical newspaper archive.
So again, that's a definite plug for the Waking Up with Analog.
And I cover everything.
Because that's where you can find all of that.
I cover medical. Yeah, I cover government. I cover everything, and you can see that things we talk about today. These big companies and Rockefeller, medicine, government, were completely opposed to these things that are now completely dominating society. The Rothschilds, we could go on, but the public opinion of all of these things in the conspiracy realm that's lapped upon today was in the open and widely discussed.
Right.
Just like it is, but instead of it being this niche, conspiracy-based, hidden on YouTube. You can say the same thing
about matters of health, for example. Like the
sure.
debates which are raging about the nature of how things work when it comes to health and what we should or shouldn't put in our bodies. Those were raging back then also, and in reality, they claim that science won, but really what really happens is at some point they say, no, the science is decided, as if science was an entity that could decide things, or they say all scientists are in agreement about, which is always a lie, because all scientists have never agreed on anything in the history of humanity, right? It's a ridiculous statement, but that's how they push doctrine or push narratives. They just say that, we've looked into this enough and now it's an open shut, close the book on this case. This is what we're rolling with now. And that's when if you start to dig into that, like take microbe theory versus terrain theory and look at the works of, Pasteur versus Beauchamp, I think is how his last name is pronounced, you find out that debate was raging, back in the day, and it wasn't science that won out there.
No, and in the 1800s, there weren't hospitals, and there was quite a large debate on what should be represented in a hospital when they first started to become popular and started popping up. And basically the decision of the people they came to was, okay, half the hospital is going to be corporations pushing medicine, pill-based, and then the rest was going to be allopathic. And in the allopathic, it was solariums, So, your symptoms are very mild. We're going to put you in a bed and you're going to lay in front of the sun. The entire day, every minute the sun's out, you're going to be there. And then there was electromagnetic therapy. And then past that, there was magnetism therapy. All of these things that are fringe that we talk about today were widely accredited and the leading forms of treatment in the public sphere in the 1800s. They were talking...
Gypsy,
yeah, exactly.
She writes, Rockefeller textbooks equal government lies. And that if you look at the history of Rockefeller and what he accomplished with, they don't call him robber barons for nothing, but he totally, if you go back and look into the Flexner report, he completely hijacked what we called medicine, turned it into petroleum-based allopathy, completely rewrote all the medical textbooks, had 2/3 of the schools across the nation closed that were practicing natural medicine and healing arts, called all of that stuff superstition and quackery, and basically ushered in the current oppressive regime that we're under now when it comes to matters of health. So it's really shocking, and it's so easy to find out about, and most people have no idea how not just in matters of health, all of the school books, our entire educational system was basically subverted and hijacked, and they're not educating us to teach us how to spot their dirty tricks or how to overthrow them, and the revolution will never be televised. So, this is where due diligence and actually doing research is so important, because if we're fed a pack of lies on just about everything, then sooner or later, it's going to become very important to be able to discern what the truth is, especially when it comes to matters of health for you and your family. Yeah,
I couldn't agree more. And, another really important part of, allopathic versus naturopathic is water. Many of the so-called resorts of the mid-1800s were health resorts. And these health resorts were on top of incredibly potent natural springs. Rockefeller was buying them all.
We'll have to do a stream on water. We've got there's a whole bunch of different threads that we could take up and do entire streams on. Water, health. At some point I need to do something, just talking a bit about chiropractic's history in relationship to allopathy, and how chiropractic was nearly squashed out entirely, and how it was saved and who saved it, and it's incredibly interesting stories. I need to use the bathroom real quick. I'd like to finish up with one more topic. Do you and Mike still have a bit of time? Can we go a touch longer? So just give me 2 minutes to top off my drink here and go to the bathroom. We'll be right back.
I'll read an article while you're gone, if that's okay. I'm just going to go ahead and do it.
You should.
Okay, where was I?
I think Mike wanted to go over some of these canal system things.
Well, why don't you go? I'm not even ready, so why don't you just, you've been quiet the whole time, so let's go over maybe what you're showing now, or we can do South Africa, which we've talked about, or we can do Arizona.
This is Mongolia, which is an interesting sign of civilization, an old civilization using the square building system, having an advanced knowledge of agriculture. You can see all the canals here.
Like
all of the black lines is basically canals.
Yeah, it's like Mexico, it's like Peru, it's like Cusco, it's like Venice.
Yep. And they definitely lead to the river.
Giant canals that connect to the river. Yeah,
and if you look closer into what you're seeing, like you can see that the canal system goes on and on and on.
Yeah, covered in mud, filled in.
It's covered in dust or mud but it goes on and on and on. Even here you can see the grid pattern, the layout. It's just that this part stands out because it's still underwater.
Yep.
It goes on and around the hills. Everywhere you see those white dots, you start discerning that same grid pattern.
Just like the American Midwest.
Just like the American Midwest, yeah, it's just slightly different, like with the star forts, and the same goes for that system in Southern Africa. I mean, you and I talked about that a lot.
There's a lot of great research out there. There's a gentleman that wrote a book about it. I can't remember his name off the top of my head. He's been on a few different podcasts, but he basically just reinforced what me and you have been saying, that the canals here could support, what did he say? I think he said like 10 billion people, or all the food of the earth.
Yeah,
and we've seen these systems covering the globe. They're in Arizona, they're in Africa.
You guys jumped right into what I was going to go into next. You read my mind. That's great. So yeah, let me show this on big screen so people can see. So zoom out a bit. Maybe I don't know what I missed when you were talking.
Not a lot. I showed a bit in Mongolia. We can go over that again if it's on the big screen a bit later. That's fine.
So this is a massive. You can't see my mouse, but they can because it's my screen they're seeing. But yeah, so you've got this massive delta, and there's an article that might have been you that came across it, but basically this guy was looking at this section. Did you already explain this to people?
I was showing.
Okay, yeah. So a guy was analyzing this what is clearly canal systems, and I have some pictures of them. Where did I go ahead and you can zoom around, but basically he did calculations based on how much food per acre can be grown, and looking at this area, how much of that area, how many people could that have supported? And you probably already said it, about 5 billion. But the portion of that area that he was looking at was just like this, it was really tiny.
It was a fraction of what I discovered afterwards. Yeah.
So those lines continue, and those lines are clearly, and I'm not sure where I have the photographs now. I closed the folder where I had things, but there's on-site photographs of this structure, and it's clearly what aqueducts or what would you call them?
Canals.
Canals. It's obviously that's not a natural formation. That is terraforming, right?
Yeah.
And the scale of it is mind-boggling, because what did you come to the conclusion that it was about 2 or 4 times bigger?
At least 4 times as big as he thought it was.
So that one little second. Now zoom out again, because now we have a taste of that area. Zoom out even more, just to get a taste of. Okay, there. So that is a tiny portion of the bottom part of Africa, right? And that area, based on this guy's calculations, and I don't know how he determined it with what we can grow and where's the average number for how much food per acre can be grown. I suppose it depends on the crop and the diversity, but the point is, conservative estimates of that region could feed 20 billion people. In other words, twice the population, 3 times the population that they tell us is currently living here, could be fed by just that one area that's on your screen. So this gets back to what I wanted to finish off talking about, which is this concept of manufactured scarcity. And I think that we're constantly being fed all sorts of different lies about the nature of how things work here. They talk about fossil fuels, but as I understand it, there's no evidence that dinosaurs turn into oil, because that's basically what they're telling us, right? Is that there's. So anyway, I think when it comes to scarcity, we're overpopulated. I think it's bullshit. When you look at the world from above, and you're flying around on Google Earth, you see everybody's crammed into these areas because we're we're basically put into the matrix. You know, they want us in cubicles in cities because then we're just going to consume loads and loads of stuff, you know, and not produce anything. And we're not going to be working in harmony with the world and how it functions. You know, I constantly talk about Victor Schauberger also and his discoveries that pertain to water and how things flow and harnessing the intelligence of nature and working in harmony with it. And all of a sudden you get things that probably they tell us are impossible, like free energy of all, you know, in all sorts of different ways. So
it's Avatar all over again. I mean, that movie is so accurate, it's scary.
And another thing that movie shows us is the nature of the reality is not carbon but crystalline.
Mm-hmm, exactly. And everything's interconnected. Remember how they interlace with the animals, they interlace with the nature of the tree, right? This is the Native American concept, or the old world that I was discussing, the kingdom of heaven, okay? Think of the tall-haired giants, the tall giants living off the land. Their God is everything.
yeah,
Everything's God. That's what they say. Everything's God. We're God, is God, the tree's God, everything, and we're all interconnected.
yeah,
Right? And then someone on a ship comes in and starts destroying everything because they want a resource. And there's no better understanding. A disconnected race that's filled with greed. And then you have one person who's a mixture of that world, but sees the purity in the other. You know, it's just like Neo. It's just like the awakened person. It's the red pill idea. I hate using that analogy, but it's so most people understand it.
Well, I mean, Google Earth in and of itself is a massive red pill. There's so much stuff that you can learn about the world that's actually real, because those are real photographs. And when you zoom in enough, you know, you can see cars parked and people there walking, you know, on the streets. That's how much resolution there is. You know, it doesn't mean some things aren't faked or blurred out or stitched together in weird ways. There's a whole bunch of, we could do a whole stream just on the bizarre anomalies that Mike has encountered, and, you know, and just simple things like try and zoom in on the North Pole or the South Pole and see what you get. You know, go look for some detail in central Antarctica. Like, oh, they'll have an excuse. It's like, oh, well, the satellites don't need to be down there at the, you know, bottom. It's like, well, they can get the far, you know, farthest parts of North America. Why can't we get the, you know, there's always something. But
one of the most interesting things with the things you mentioned there is like the North Pole, no ice.
Oh, there's the strip there. I just saw the strip.
And then Greenland.
What about Greenland?
You tell me, because there's no features in Greenland.
Yeah, so if you zoom in, there's nothing there, no detail.
No, it just turns into a very annoying white mess.
Yeah.
It's just like old photos. I always make this connection in my head. It's like you study enough old photos, you know, the term going around is vanilla sky. You know, they edited all these old pictures because they didn't want you to see what was going on in the sky.
Well, there's another bone of contention between like the Ewar wooden nickels side and Stuff Beagle and Autodidactic. Is there like different claims are being made, and they're saying, well, these guys don't understand the basics of how photography worked at that time, and the cameras were designed in a way and the film worked in a particular way that they only got certain aspects of the spectrum, and then they can show with modern Photoshop software that, hey, if we mess with the levels in this way, every time we can turn one of these photos into one of these 1900s photos, and then you get the vanilla sky. But it's a smooth vanilla sky. But that doesn't mean that there aren't lots of examples of photographs that have clearly been manipulated. And you can see like things are partially edited out, but they didn't do the whole job because they weren't expecting, you know, random people to be zooming in, you know, on these high definition photos. So
yeah, but that's the same with Google Earth. People find things that they really didn't want to be found.
Right.
Google itself is incapable of fixing the seam.
Oh yeah, you're showing the strip here. I just went back to the trees momentarily because I wanted to get back onto that, to finish up. But the strip, yeah. So that thing is such an anomaly, right? When you
This now it's not an anomaly. This is literally what Google does. Like what they do is they take millions and millions and millions and millions of pictures, rectangular images.
Mm-hmm.
They stitch them all together, and then they make them fit around a ball model.
Yeah.
And to do that, you have to take a ball model, wrap all of those pictures around it, and you get a seam. No matter which way you put it, you get a seam. And that's this thing. It starts at the North Pole, and that's where it's most visible.
Yeah, and if you zoom in on it, turn it vertical, like straight up and down. Just rotate the screen. And then like zoom in and follow, just follow the line. That's what I was saying. So there you see like all the weather, you see the clouds. Just follow, go along the length of it.
Yeah, I was attempting to.
Oh, maybe zoom out.
Getting used to this thing.
Yeah.
And seeing as this is a...
So now you can't really see it because you tilted it. Go back or just rotate to straight up and down. So when you go along this length, eventually you start to see land, you see mountains, you see islands, but you only see this little tiny strip. But when you zoom out, everything else is fake until you get to that island, right?
No.
Water.
It continues on towards the South Pole. That's what I mean by it's the seam. This is where they stick it all together.
Yeah.
Yep.
And they did quite a good job, but you cannot avoid
But
a stitch.
isn't that kind of the proof that they're hiding stuff there? Because that strip is what's real, and isn't it?
Oh yeah.
You're not looking at the sea, are you? You're looking at blue.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. It's like the vanilla sky. That's what I was trying.
This gets back to my main point, which is that Google Earth
this is
itself.
the thing. If space was real, and you'd be in there, you wouldn't see this. You'd see an ocean, right? And you'd see clouds, and you'd see weather, and you don't see massives under the sea.
Right. Yeah.
Just like you don't see green in Siberia because it's snowed over most all of the year. So they took those rare moments where there wasn't any snow and they took pictures, stitched it all together and made it look like this. And where necessary, we add details by photoshopping stuff in. Because that's literally what they do. They even freely admit that.
Yeah.
They can't make Earth look like Earth on the pictures from NASA. Blah, blah, blah.
Right. Well, if it wasn't for this tool, I would never have started to even look more closely at Mont Go. It was that initial, journey out and tilting it and realizing I could look at it in 3D and kind of rotate around it and realize that there was a lot more to it than just, it kind of looks like an elephant from one angle. There was a whole bunch of different anatomical features that I could see already right there at the beginning. So it's definitely a good tool, but it doesn't, always accurately represent reality. And that's an important thing to remember. In NLP, they talk about the map is not the territory. And this is still a map, even though a lot of this is made from real pictures, that it can be toyed with, just like what you were saying, Ben, about the photos, these old photos being manipulated as well.
Yeah, and I've played around on Photoshop, and I've seen hundreds, thousands maybe, of these photos. And you can, if you look close enough, especially on the edges of the buildings where they meet the sky, if they have like sharp edges or steeples or antennas or whatever you want to call them, you'll see errors in their photoshopping all the time, where they're trying to be close, but they're just wiping out part of an antenna or part of an edge of a building. Yeah. I've seen it tons of times.
And I have too, and that's why I said what I said before about Ewar on wooden nickels, is I feel like they've probably come under attack, and so they've kind of gone on attack, and they're missing the point of, it's like you got to collaborate, and if every video they produce is, look, this is what all the people who have been talking about Tartaria have gotten wrong, and so that means they're wrong about everything, or maybe they're wrong about most things, instead of realizing, well, there's a whole lot of stuff that people were looking at, they were trying to understand it and describe it, and they didn't have a cohesive way of looking at it all. But the more you look at this stuff, the more it starts to all dovetail, make a lot of sense, and it goes nicely together. It's not some long-reaching, far-fetched, crazy conspiracy theory that all of these things were real. Well, guess what? I mean, if you look at this photograph here on the screen, whoops, this looks a heck of a lot like tree, and when you get up close to it, it is tree, and that's what Hangman has been showing. So there are some things that you can know for yourself if you start to look into like his footage. It's undeniable. Those are look at this. Tell me that isn't tree.
Yeah, it is.
And when you get up close to that, you see grain. And when that breaks off into pieces, smaller and smaller and smaller pieces, especially when you get them wet under the water, you can see all the grain in them. So this is what's cool. Is like you can learn a lot from Google Earth, but what's most important is boots on the ground, right? Because then you can get up close to it and you can see, and you may make interesting discoveries as you start to do that. I don't have a background in geology whatsoever, and if anything that I've been talking about with regarding the petrified organs or the mountain, if there's any truth to any of it, then it upends a lot of what we've been given by mainstream geology. So it's important to look at things with new eyes. So this is based. I'm 100% convinced that this is giant cedar. This is what Mike Alley has been showing in all of his amazing footage on the Hangman 1128 channel, and it's just it's truly astonishing. And when you see it for what it is, there's a lot of people who would call that a melted building, but I'll save that for another time. But this is, sorry, I can't turn down the volume on this, but it's just
the problem people have is always scale.
Yeah.
And this ties back in with what you were saying. Like, you just can't focus on negativity or any of that stuff. That ultimately you're a piece in a giant puzzle. And if you start thinking that you have it right or someone has it wrong, you're doing yourself disfavor. And
Yeah.
it's important. It's important to make connections like we have. I mean, all of us three here have been friends for a few years now.
Mm-hmm.
And we all bring something different to the puzzle. And it's important to realize that in everybody, and that you gotta, as my friend would say, you gotta chew the meat and spit out the bones. And there's going to be things that help you in your journey build a fuller picture of reality. You always got to be open to the craziest ideas. You can't be closed-minded to anything, because it's proving more and more that the fantasy that we grew up watching
wishing
and
for
reading is closer to reality than the narratives we've been given. And geology and mineralogy and petrifaction all are so interrelated. And this is something that they were writing on 150 years ago, and they were openly saying, wow, these petrified skeletons and giants we're finding are the exact same thing that we're digging in the mountain for. And look at this petrified forest in Arizona. These trees have every mineral, like hundreds of minerals in them. This is very strange.
Yeah. Well, that's also what Mike is showing now. There's a moped going by here. That's really so, poignant, because, and I had it paused there and it just went away as I tried to move it. But there's, you probably recognize this because this is your neck of the woods, right? Didn't you grow up in Utah?
No, my wife did, but I've been to the Scablands and I've been to Moab and all over the Southwest.
I'm trying to here. Okay, so you're familiar with this spot, maybe? This is Angel's Landing in Zion. So this is, so once you have the eyes to see, this is so clearly tree, all of it, and the way it breaks and separates. It's Hangman has done a tremendous amount of work, because this is one of his videos I'm showing here, because he's not just gotten a ton of footage of his own, he's also gathered all kinds of footage from around the world, and when you see it for what it is, it gets to kind of one of the points that I wanted to finish up with, is this idea of something being self-evident, you know, that we're taught not to see things, because if the entire paradigm that we've been brought up in is incorrect, or major portions of it have been omitted or inverted or twisted in one way or another, then we grow up believing certain things about the world around us that might have no basis in actual empirical, observable reality. And so something like these great trees or the petrified organs, which I've done loads of videos about, this is the kind of thing that the average person is going to be completely blinded to. And then as soon as they're you know, confronted with it, they're going to have a whole lot of pre-programmed responses without even really reflecting on things. This is true of the nature of our Earth shape as well. You see certain, you know, arguments or questions come up over and over again, but people, you know, when you dig into it, they really don't even know their own model and what they grew up believing and thinking is just fact and has a basis in science. You know, they don't even understand the basics of the heliocentric model, for example, and how big things are and how fast they move and how much curvature there should be and all this sort of thing. So it's, you know, it's so
It's Occam's razor.
refreshing. Yeah, it's Occam's razor. It's so refreshing to me to see footage like this and to realize it is what it is. And, you know, so he's showing just all the different manifestations of it. And
These lies that we've been taught our whole childhood are overtly complicated because they have to be. Lies are always more complicated than truth. Occam's razor is so overarching in this alternative space that we're a part of.
here you can see the sap. So you got all the grains of the wood, and you got the sap here and here.
Oh yeah, and me and you have talked a bunch about what happens when sap gets petrified.
Yeah.
And
Well, and
how
I just learned the other day that there's two different kinds of sap also. One is called phloem. It's Phloem. And it's of a different chemical composition than the other sap, which now I've forgotten the name of. So phloem, and somebody just sent it to me. Sorry, I haven't memorized it yet, but anyway, so this is what I would call self-evident, and he shows it in every single manifestation. This is clearly broken tree, and this whole area here, which might be 50 foot wide or so, is this whole area is just a tiny little chunk in what was something that was probably 10 miles wide at its base, and this is just one of a myriad, and you can see how it's here, it's smooth. There, you can find other areas where it looks like this, but it's blackened and it looks like it's vitrified as well. So you know, there have been if the great trees were taken out, there's probably been other cataclysms since, or maybe they were torched as well in the process of being.
I've postulated making another connection to archaics, and hopefully someday you two can get together and I'll have a list of questions that you can ask him. But I've postulated, my theory is that his so-called fall of the vapor canopy was the fall of the trees, and that these trees and the canopies they created were all just like a tropical rainforest, right? They have such a diverse ecosystem, and the differences in humidity and the rain above and below is incredible. And just imagine a 20-mile tall tree, or, you know, that's probably an exaggeration, a mile tall tree, 2 mile tall tree, or 100-mile tall tree, 10-mile at the base, and all of their canopies are connected.
Yes.
This is kind of the theory I'm creating, and that when he talks about the vapor canopy falling, that it's when all the trees were cut down.
Right, and also
Imagine-
you have to consider sorry, just one second. The amount of
Imagine all the life
Yeah,
that lives
that's what I
in
was gonna
one
say.
of those trees, like and one of those trees gets cut down. Imagine all the life lost.
Yeah, and
Imagine all the hearts that leaves, and the heart is all that remains after a big fire, isn't it?
Yeah, and they estimate, I think, that 90% or no, 80% of the life in the rainforest actually lives in the trees. So only 20% is roaming around on the ground. So that ties into the petrified organs idea also, is that, oh, how could there be so many, stones? And, it's like there are all these criticisms, but people are not pondering these. You have to think about the great trees, how many species there could have been. I've shown in videos a murmuring, which is it's like a flock of starlings that fly. When I lived in Rome, they would fly around the cupola of San Pietro, this big church, and they'd come out probably because of the telluric currents, the energies of not just the building itself, but where the building was sitting, and they'd just do this dance and I could pull it up quick, but I'm too slow with that, so I won't bother. But the point being that there was once so much life in the realm that Dante wrote of flocks of birds that would block out the sun for hours at a time as they were flying by. Like, that's a lot of birds, And I've seen some pretty big flocks when I lived in Rome. There was once this river of birds that flew by my window. I was on the 8th floor apartment, and they flew by my window for it was like 5 minutes or 6 minutes straight, just unbroken line of, a ton of birds. It was fascinating. So that ties into the big trees. If there was some kind of a major electrical plasma event, then what would have been hit first? The tops of the trees, I would suspect, right? And so all of that life that was up there would have probably just rained down as a whole bunch of stones, but that's
and fire.
And fire and whatnot. But that ties into my whole boiled egg theory and bone broth theory when it comes to the petrified organs.
It's all interrelated. Again, not to say that it's just one event, but...
So keep in mind, if you're still watching the screen, this is stone. Just think of a knot of wood, a sappy knot of wood on a tree. This is identical. It's just a larger scale of the same phenomenon. And when you get up close, you can see all the grain. And they're telling us these are sedimentary layers that are laid down over, tens, millions of years. There's a big clump of sap right there. Like, how did that form in the sedimentary layer? If that story they're giving us is true. And this gets back to the main point, is that some truths are self-evident. And when you understand and have the eyes to see, and you can see them from what they are, then you reach a point where you actually can know something. And there's a difference between, seeing and understanding and knowing. And this is why, I'm so obsessed and keep plugging his work. I don't know why it took so long for me to really come around to how important this was, and that this wasn't being seen by enough people. This is what I was talking about before with it almost looks vitrified, and it's darker. And he'll show this with a tree trunk, and right down to the size of something you put between your finger looks exactly the same as this massive piece that you're seeing here. So it's fractal in nature, and it's truly amazing, the realm that we're in. And yeah, so.
Yeah, truth is stranger than fiction, 100%. And the truth is out there. You just gotta, you gotta knock on the door. You gotta go seek it.
And like you said, it's usually much simpler than everything they taught you is real.
Mm-hmm. They gotta come up with all these geological myths and all the water erosion and the land and the Grand Canyon and was hundreds of feet taller than it was, and millions of years of water erosion have led us with the landscape we know of today, and that's continually disproven.
Yeah, it's a bunch of beep.
I mean, there obviously there is water erosion, but it's a blanket term to cover up a lot of nonsense.
Yeah, well, erosion is one of those things that they will invoke. The same, that's how they explain the heartstones that I'm showing. Is they're talking about lumps of clay that have been compressed in another medium due to pressure, and have started to work their way towards becoming metamorphic rock, and then are freed from that medium, and then smoothed out and polished and rolled around in river bottoms. And I reject that notion because of the complexity of the rocks that I've found, and the plethora of evidence to show that there is a reoccurring pattern
A simple
and theme in the stones. That, yeah, what were you going to say?
a simple way to sort of disprove that is to look at those small little stones they make from crystals. They put them in a tumbler, which is basically a sped up effect of a rock tumbling through a river.
Right, on a smaller
And
scale, so you would expect it to do the same thing.
They don't come out as heart shaped.
Right. Well,
Oh yeah, that's all
and this
nonsense.
gets back to another part, is that there's a lot of stones that people could find that might take on that shape, but if you look closer, you realize that it is erosion. If you dunk it underwater, you'll see these fine micro-parallel layers, because what you're actually looking at, and Mike has shown this, there's a video, let's see if I can find it real quick, Hangman1128, he's got a video that he's basically just sitting with different buckets, and he's showing all the different manifestations of all of the same stuff on a smaller scale. And he let's see if it just happens to be here. Now we're back out in the woods again. Back to some of that. So yeah. Anyway, it was. Oh, I know I just remembered the title. Let's see if I can find it. Yeah. Well,
And to reinforce your theories, in the 1800s, every mining company was talking about what you're discussing. They were finding petrified brains, petrified limbs, petrified hearts, petrified livers, spleens, and they were saying it for what it was. Oh, we broke it open. It looked like a heart. Everyone was like, no, then we broke it open. Obviously it is. Look, you can see just like what you're doing.
Right. Yeah, so it's not just a harebrained idea that I've cherry-picked a bunch of evidence in support of. I kind of, didn't even realize what I was finding, and then the theories came along the way because I was trying to, better understand the evidence itself. And yeah, so I believe it to be self-evident. They may prove themselves to be something else that I haven't thought of, or somebody might, prove something else along the way. But they're definitely not polycalcitic conglomerate cobbles, which is, what the mainstream would tell us they are. And when you see the scalability and the specificity of the anatomy, you might decide for yourself that what I'm showing is also self-evident, just like these trees, just like the fact that the star forts are everywhere and on a scale that you can't comprehend, and they shouldn't be everywhere based on the narratives, and the canals that could feed 20 billion people just with a tiny section of Africa, and the architecture. And so what if the World's Fairs were made out of wood, and you can show every stage of the construction? It still doesn't make the World's Fairs any less mysterious, right? There's so much oddity when it comes to the World Fairs and the why of them, and different aspects of it, whether it's the orphan trains or the baby incubators, or the the prevalence of all the sanitariums and the asylums. And we have a very interesting past that I think most of us are completely unaware of, and it takes, unfortunately, a lot of time to be able to start to learn about these things and sift through them and try and determine fact from fiction, because it's not always easy.
No, the realm was covered previously. Something happened. The remnants of them were reconstituted and a new population introduced.
Yeah.
Simple as that. I know it doesn't sound, that's like a big jump to some people, but ultimately that's where it all goes to, is that within 300 years from right now, things were completely different. Everywhere.
And maybe we can finish off with 13th Monkey's globe programming there. No, that's the dog begging for a cookie, right?
Mike, you're muted.
Mike.
Am I then? Kitty was being very annoying, so sorry. Yeah, that's just the doggy that is Africa. It's begging for a cookie from Spain, but it's not getting it because it pooped Madagascar all over the floor.
It's clear as a bell.
Yeah, it is, isn't it?
Yeah. What's the front paw resting on?
Saudi Arabia.
All right. Well, there you have it. Well, thank you very much, guys, for joining me for this. This has been a lot of fun. I'm sorry I've been neglecting the chat the whole time. It's still doing this sort of thing is still very new to me, and production and sound and levels of I need some practice and maybe some tips from people who know more than me that can help me work out the bugs. But this is a lot of fun to do and to kind of bring you guys in. I've enjoyed our conversations over the last years, so it seems that we should only share our musings with others instead of just keeping them to ourselves. So so anything you guys would like to say? I didn't really give any kind of an introduction to you, Ben, as far as who you are, your past, what you do and are interested in, but we can maybe save that for another time. And if anyone wants to throw in a last minute question in the chat. Hi, Ian. Gypsy,
I'd like
Sherry,
to give I'd like to give a little plug to Kurumeo Ahau.
Oh yeah, I haven't hardly seen. I saw one video that you did with him, Ben, but that's a cool channel. Check that out.
That's a channel worthy.
If you want to spell it for people or write it in the chat or something.
I'll write it down in the chat.
Dad, well, my time has come and gone, so I appreciate you having me.
Yeah.
And love y'all.
Perfect timing.
You have a great day, Ben.
Daddy, another Earth right there.
Yeah, we're looking at Earth. Yep.
There's 2 Earths right there.
Yeah, 2 Earths. Yeah. Love you guys. Thanks for having me.
Take care, Ben. Thanks for joining in. That was perfect timing. So thank you, Mike, and thanks for everyone who's still watching in the chat. And I hope you enjoyed it. It was there's still 96 people watching. That's cool. Thanks to everybody. Lady Lux, Willie, Gypsy, and Ian Derp, Gypsy, Sherry. Yeah, thanks to all the mods. You guys are great. I haven't thanked you nearly enough for hanging out and keeping afloat to the chat. So really appreciate you guys, and to everybody else who's watching as well. If you're still with us, until next time. My name's Mike, and this is Mike.
Hi,
fellow members of the Mike Tinuum. Hope you had a Mike-tastic time, and
totally Mike-tified.
Yeah, it was Mike-tifying.
Absolutely.
Thanks.